The early 2000s is a very influential period in gaming. At the start of the millennium, the gaming world entered an era called the 6th generation era. The Sony PlayStation 2 was the generation's biggest video game console, becoming the best-selling console in history with over 150 million units sold as of February 2011. Capcom was one company that thrived during the 6th generation era. The company gave us some of the most memorable cult classics such as Resident Evil 4, Devil May Cry 3 Dante's Awakening, Monster Hunter, and Onimusha 3 Demon Siege. One Capcom PlayStation 2 classic that is somewhat overlooked is the game that we are discussing in this video, Sengoku Basara. Sengoku Basara is a series that I considered very highly. This is basically Capcom's take on the popularity of Koei's musou hack and slash games, Dynasty and Samurai Warriors. Much like Koei's Samurai Warriors, Capcom's Sengoku Basara is a game that takes place during the Warring States period or Sengoku Jidai of Japan. Characters of the series are based off popular historical figures of the time such as Oda Nobunaga, Date Masamune, Sanada Yukimura, and many more. Although Sengoku Basara is considered niche towards the Western audience, the series is highly popular in Japan and other countries in Asia, including where I am, Indonesia. Sengoku Basara started its popularity amongst Asian gamers with its first game released in Japan on 21st of July 2005, exclusive for the PlayStation 2. As of today, Sengoku Basara is a series that has existed for almost 20 years. In this video, we will have an in-depth retrospective of the first Sengoku Basara game. From the development history to the gameplay aspects, we will cover everything you need to know on how Sengoku Basara started in its early days. The year was 2003. It was at the height of the 6th generation console era. The Sony PlayStation 2 had become the best-selling console as it sold cumulatively around 350 million units worldwide as of March 2003. Up to that year, the console has given us amazing exclusive titles that became its bestsellers, such as Final Fantasy X, Kingdom Hearts, Jak and Daxter, the Precursor Legacy, Dynasty Warriors 4, and many more. Around the same time as well, Capcom produced some games that not only sold well, but became cult classics among the gaming communities. Games such as Resident Evil Code Veronica X, Devil May Cry, Onimusha Warlords, and Onimusha 2 Samurai's Destiny became huge hits in the early 2000s. Although Capcom had produced financially successful games prior to 2003, Capcom suffered quite the financial loss by winter 2003. During the second and third quarter of 2003, Capcom suffered a loss of 45 billion yen, which is the equivalent of 4.9 trillion US dollars in 2003. Capcom needed to produce games that could help them bounce back from the massive financial loss, especially for their domestic market. If we take a look at the games Capcom released in the year 2003, we can see that a lot of them were received rather poorly, both financially and critically. Games such as Dino Crisis 3, Devil May Cry 2, Mega Man X7, and Resident Evil Dead Aim were heavily criticized by gamers and did not meet the sales requirement for the company. Dino Crisis 3 especially was considered by many to be Capcom's biggest financial failure of 2003. The game sold only 60,000 copies in Japan as of winter 2003. It was a huge fall compared to their biggest release, less than a year prior, Onimusha 2 Samurai's Destiny, that sold up to 1 million copies in Japan. It's worth mentioning as well that Dino Crisis 3 was an Xbox exclusive, which was a console that sold less than the PlayStation 2, especially in Japan. On November 2003, Capcom's producer, Kobayashi Hiroyuki, proposed an idea for a game that could help increase the sales for its Japanese market. He wanted to create a game where it's easy to get into. In order to increase the sales, Kobayashi believed that it was important for a game to be easily playable for everyone to enjoy. A quick resume of Kobayashi Hiroyuki. He worked with Capcom for 27 years until his departure in 2022. As Capcom's producer, he worked on many Capcom's most successful games prior to 2003, such as Resident Evil 2, Dino Crisis 2, and Devil May Cry. The game that Kobayashi proposed was an action game where you play as famous historical samurai warriors of Japan. Now, according to an interview with IGN, Kobayashi indeed took ideas from Koei's Dynasty Warriors, with Capcom's very own spin. He acknowledged that Dynasty Warriors games such as Dynasty Warriors 3 and Dynasty Warriors 4 were doing really well financially, selling over 1 million copies each. A Capcom's version of Dynasty Warriors was what he believed might help the company's domestic sales. When his idea was being presented to the higher-ups of Capcom, a lot of people were highly skeptical. There were two major concerns with Kobayashi's idea of a Capcom's Dynasty Warriors that takes place in the Warring States period of Japan. The first concern was related to Capcom's big financial loss. Considering they have lost 45 billion yen in the course of 2 quarters, developing a new game altogether was quite the risky move. Although Kobayashi's project was designed to increase the company's earnings, a financial loss after developing a completely new game could be detrimental. Other Capcom directors at the time suggested that the company should focus only on making sequels of an already popular titles. The thought of making more games from Resident Evil, Mega Man, Street Fighter, and other popular Capcom IPs would create a more stable income for the company without risking a big financial loss. However, Kobayashi disagreed with this statement. Kobayashi stated this in regards to making more sequels instead of a new title. This is a game for casual user segment, unlike anything we have done before. If we only play it safe, we will keep sliding downhill. Kobayashi's statement was also proven with the fact that a lot of Capcom's major titles at the time were received rather poorly. As stated before, Dino Crisis 3 was Capcom's biggest financial failure, and that was coming from one of the company's major IPs at the time. The second concern was in regards to the idea of a samurai game based on the Warring States period. Capcom didn't want to produce another samurai game considering they have released 2 Onimusha games not long before. The company feared that Kobayashi's idea would result in cannibalization. For those of you who are not familiar with the term cannibalization, no, we are not talking about an act of a human eating another human's flesh. Cannibalization in this situation can be described with 2 different contexts, which are marketing and fiction. In the context of marketing, cannibalization is the introduction of a new product that harms the sales of another product created by the same producers. Capcom was concerned that Kobayashi's game might reduce the sale of Onimusha games, considering both of them are samurai action games based on the same historical period. In the context of fiction, cannibalization is the act of adapting, borrowing, or stealing plots, characters, themes, or ideas from one story to be used in another medium. Once again, Kobayashi's game had a similar setting with Onimusha. Worth mentioning as well, Koei was set to release Samurai Warriors in Japan on 11th of February 2004. So during this discussion of a Capcom's version of Dynasty Warriors in the company, Koei was already preparing to release their samurai game based on the Warring States period. So Capcom is in another risk of fiction cannibalization with a competing company. To cool down the concerns of cannibalization, Kobayashi stated that his game is not going to be the same as Onimusha. The game that he proposed will have a different target audience than Onimusha. Thus, marketing cannibalization will not be an issue. As for Kobayashi's method to prevent fiction cannibalization, that will be discussed a little later in this video. Even with all of doubts surrounding this idea, Capcom's president and co-founder, Sugimoto Kenzo, gave the green light for this project. He believed that this is worth the shot and the necessary move during Capcom's difficult financial times. An hour after the project was approved, Kobayashi gave a name to the new game. The game is called Sengoku Basara. The development of Sengoku Basara had a really rough start. From winter of 2003, Kobayashi was given 18 months to develop the game with a very strict budget as well. As the producer of Sengoku Basara, his goal was to create a game that anyone could play easily. Capcom games prior to 2003 had a reputation for its difficulty. Most of their single-player games were mainly action survival games such as Resident Evil, Dino Crisis, Onimusha, and Devil May Cry. For months, Kobayashi had trouble to find the appeal that could replace the difficulty of most Capcom games. By the 7th month of development, Kobayashi made a decision to change the director of the Sengoku Basara project. This new director was an employee of Capcom for only 2 years, as he had been working the development division for various projects. The new director's name is Yamamoto Makoto. Prior to joining Capcom in 2002, Yamamoto had worked as a 3D character designer and a programmer for various action games. In the genre of hack and slash, Yamamoto was the 3D character creator and programmer for Sword of Berserk Guts Rage, released for the Sega Dreamcast in 1999. Yamamoto was no stranger of being a game director as well, since he was the director for Swingers Golf, released for the Nintendo GameCube in 2002. After joining Capcom in 2002, Yamamoto's first big project in the development department was an object designer for PN03, released for the Nintendo GameCube in 2003. According to Capcom's development history, Yamamoto was hired as director by Kobayashi because he was the one person who understood Kobayashi's vision the most. He also found out a concept that could replace difficulty as the appeal of a Sengoku Basara game. His idea was character element. Considering Sengoku Basara was heavily inspired by Koei's Dynasty Warriors, the appeal of these games were not necessarily the difficulty. This is going to be a personal take in regards to Dynasty Warriors. Whenever I play Dynasty Warriors or other similar musou games, I usually immerse myself in the game with the character that I'm playing. I do love trying out different characters to see what cool moves and tricks I can do to slash as many enemies on the battlefield. It's a similar take on how I view classic arcade beat-em-up games, though there are some challenges to be found in those games, but the biggest appeal in my opinion is always about the characters. The approach for Sengoku Basara was indeed the aesthetics and gameplay of characters. So according to Yamamoto, if the characters played can be presented as expressive and even outlandish as they can, then players can project themselves into these characters, thus immerse themselves in the game even when the battle is simple. They wanted for players to enjoy playing as the characters as much as they can. By this point, the development team had an idea on how Sengoku Basara will play out. They wanted to make Sengoku Basara a Capcom's take on Dynasty Warriors that emphasizes more on the character's personality as well as distinguish themselves from what Koei has made. Another way Capcom tried to distinguish itself from Samurai Warriors is to give Sengoku Basara a more anime feel, so to speak. Some cutscenes in the first Sengoku Basara game were done in 2D to give that anime look. The anime-style approach of Sengoku Basara would become a trademark for the series in the future. With only 9 months to go, the team must work on this concept to make Sengoku Basara a reality. Now, let us talk about the characters of Sengoku Basara and how they distinguish themselves with Koei's Samurai Warriors in terms of characterization. As mentioned previously, the biggest appeal of Sengoku Basara is the characters. The development team wanted to make characters as expressive as possible so that players can immerse themselves in the game through the characters. As the director, Yamamoto pitched ideas for characters to be as over-the-top as possible based on certain aspects of their historical lore. For example, Date Masamune was a historical figure during the Warring States period who was famous for conducting foreign diplomacy to various countries such as the Philippines, Mexico, Spain, and Italy. He went even as far as establishing a relationship with the Pope of Rome at the time. Because of this historical note, Yamamoto decided to have Masamune speak English quite often as part of his character trait.
Are you ready, guys? Yeah! Hit the downtown! Yeah! Okay, are you ready?
Another example is Sanada Yukimura, who was famous for his bravery. He has the nickname of a hero who appeared once in 100 years and the Crimson Demon of War. He was also very known to be loyal to whomever he was serving. The developers made him a young hot-headed warrior who is battle crazy, so to speak, and would scream often as well. He also showed insane loyalty to his master, Takeda Shingen, to the point where it's somewhat comical. Masamune and Yukimura would become the poster boys of Sengoku Basara, although they never interacted in actual history, but in the game they are rivals. Their personalities are also a contrast to one another, Masamune being the cool-headed warrior, while Yukimura being the hot-headed warrior. Probably one of the craziest ideas Yamamoto came up with was Honda Tadakatsu. Honda Tadakatsu was known to be a loyal warrior of the Tokugawa that was also said to have fought 100 battles and never lost once. So not only did they make Tadakatsu the strongest character in the game, but they also made him into a Gundam-like robot. According to Kobayashi, him and Yamamoto would take characters and their historical fact, then dial them from 1 all the way to 100. To quote Kobayashi himself, "Our line of thinking was, even when based on historical fact, imagination should be used freely to thoroughly distort and expand those facts to create a completely off-the-wall feudal warlord characters." The over-the-top nature of Sengoku Basara is one of the key differences to that of the somewhat more grounded approach of samurai warriors. I would also give my personal opinion where I believe that the direction Sengoku Basara took was also to avoid cannibalization from its competitor, Samurai Warriors. The characters in Sengoku Basara were designed by a longtime Capcom artist, Tsuchibayashi Makoto. Tsuchibayashi designed the monsters and zombies for the first Resident Evil game. Although he left Capcom in 1999 and became a freelance artist, he still worked with Capcom by designing characters for the first Devil May Cry game. Outside of Capcom, he was most known for designing characters for Shinobi and Nightshade. Kobayashi also wanted to have top-tier Japanese voice actors for the game. Not only he wanted to bring life to these characters, he also wanted to have voice actors as good marketing value for the game. A lot of the voice actors became synonymous with Sengoku Basara characters such as Nakai Kazuya as Date Masamune, Hoshi Shoichiro as Sanada Yukimura, and Wakamoto Norio as Oda Nobunaga, to name a few. As the first game, Sengoku Basara has 16 playable characters in the roster and 5 unique non-playable characters. The characterization of Sengoku Basara is something that I often praise, considering it was always the priority for the developers. Since it is the main priority, Capcom always find ways to make characters as expressive as possible, from their personality, gameplay moveset, and even down to the music when you fight them as enemy bosses. Now, with that out of the way, let's take a look on how Sengoku Basara differs itself from Dynasty and Samurai Warriors in terms of gameplay. The gameplay mechanics of Sengoku Basara differs as well from Koei's Dynasty and Samurai Warriors. When it comes to Dynasty or Samurai Warriors, you have normal attacks, charge attacks, and musou attacks. For regular attacks, you can either do a chain of normal attacks or a chain of normal attacks that ends with a charge attack. In Sengoku Basara, instead of charge attacks, you have special attacks. Before you start a battle, on the preparation menu, you have to choose 2 different special attacks to equip your character. You press the triangle button to perform the special attack, while you press the L1 button to switch between the 2 special attacks. Just like in Dynasty and Samurai Warriors, you can chain your normal attacks with a special attack. In this game, you can even chain a special attack with another special attack. Special attacks in Sengoku Basara were designed to be very flashy. Considering Kobayashi was the producer of Devil May Cry, he wanted for characters to be as flashy as possible to give a more stylish combat to that of Devil May Cry. Speaking of which, the game also has references to Devil May Cry. Some weapons were taken straight out of Devil May Cry, such as Masamune wielding 6 Alicers, Yukimura wielding the Blades of Sparda, and Nohime wielding Ebony and Ivory. Just like in Koei's Dynasty and Samurai Warriors, you can perform an ultimate attack. Instead of musou attacks, the game calls it the Basara attack. Just like Koei's version of the game, you beat up enemies to fill up your Basara bar, then press the circle button to perform the Basara attack. The more stylish approach of Sengoku Basara was once again to avoid cannibalization with other Capcom games like Onimusha and competitor games like Samurai Warriors. The amount of special attacks per character and their flair is what made Sengoku Basara stand out. The combat of Sengoku Basara eventually improved as the series progressed, from the somewhat simplistic mechanics of the first game to later become one of the most complex combat in a musou-like game. The main composer for Sengoku Basara was Ishii Masayoshi. Ishii is a member of a Japanese music company called T's Music. T's Music is famous for producing soundtracks since the 90s for multiple video game companies such as Capcom, Nintendo, Sega, and many more. Other than Sengoku Basara, Ishii's most notable works were for Nintendo games such as the Mario Party series and the Yoshi Island series. Alongside Ishii Masayoshi, Suzuki Marika helped to co-compose soundtracks for Sengoku Basara. Suzuki Marika is a longtime sound and music composer for Capcom. She acted mostly as a supporting composer for multiple Capcom projects. Her biggest contribution was for the Monster Hunter series. She finally got a major role as the lead composer in 2018 for Mega Man 11. As stated before, Kobayashi wanted to have top-tier Japanese voice actors to not only give life to the characters, but as marketing value as well. Capcom did the same thing for the music aspect of the game. Capcom hired Nishikawa Takanori, aka TM Revolution, for the opening song of Sengoku Basara. This was also the start of a long-time partnership. TM Revolution became a staple for Sengoku Basara as a multimedia franchise. He sang the opening songs for most Sengoku Basara media products, from video games to anime series. He's basically the voice of the franchise. Sengoku Basara is a series that I considered very highly. It is a good alternative from Koei's Dynasty and Samurai Warriors. I always liked the anime and over-the-top approach of Sengoku Basara, especially for a musou-like game that came out in the mid-2000s. By the end of 2005, Sengoku Basara was able to sell 167,000 copies domestically in Japan. Although it wasn't able to compete the sales of Koei's musou games, but it did a good job as a first-time game. The game also helped to boost Capcom sales in Japan. Worth mentioning that Sengoku Basara was not the main and sole reason behind Capcom bouncing back from a financial loss. By that time, Devil May Cry 3 Dante's Awakening and Resident Evil 4 became Capcom's biggest hits. Those games not only sold well for the company, but became cult classics as well. The first Sengoku Basara game did well for Capcom to the point where they eventually created 9 more games for the series. Although Sengoku Basara as a video game series alone did not compete financially with Koei's Dynasty and Samurai Warriors, the series still created a strong following. In fact, Sengoku Basara became a multimedia franchise and a pop culture phenomenon in Japan and other Asian countries, bigger than that of Koei's musou games. Other than video games, Sengoku Basara was able to branch out to other products such as anime and manga, and had the good record as well. After the release of Sengoku Basara in Japan, Capcom decided to release the game worldwide as Devil Kings. This game has probably one of the weirdest localization ever, and talking about it can be a separate video of its own. Honestly, I'm not sure if I'm going to cover Devil Kings. It's better to just stay away from that game in my opinion, and stick to the original Sengoku Basara in Japanese. So that's an in-depth retrospective of Sengoku Basara. What are your thoughts about Sengoku Basara, or the series in general? Let me know in the comment section below. With that being said, this is me, Profar. If you like this video, give me a thumbs up. If you dislike it, give me a thumbs down. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, join the Profar Mokori Hunter X Discord server, and I'll see you guys in the next video.